Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I am here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to talk about dissertation critiques. At this point, we're fairly well into the semester, so I'm going to gloss over the details about working with the Writing Center, except to say that this is a free service. All of our services are free to students enrolled in ACU's online programs, and we are happy to work with you at any stage in your writing. We're getting close to the end of the semester, so if you have received any feedback about flow, synthesis, about having stronger argument, I'm going to recommend that you either attend or watch a recording of our upcoming Beyond Summary Adding Analysis and Synthesis to Your Writing webinar. That's coming up this Thursday at 6 o'clock. And we have a couple more in our conflict management and EdD sequences coming up next week. We have worked on restructuring our webinar archive because we now have dozens and dozens and dozens of webinars. And I'm not exaggerating. At my last count, there are 23 different EdD-related webinars in our archive. So if you haven't taken a peek recently, I'm going to recommend that you visit the Writing Center website, and let me just show you really quickly what I'm talking about. If you go to the Writing Center website and go to our webinars page, at the top you'll see our schedule of upcoming webinars. And as we offer these, we go ahead and we add links to the slide decks and the video recordings so you can watch those. And then at the bottom, we have our full alphabetical listing. What's changed is in the middle, there's this sorted guide here. And for example, let me just make sure that everyone can see my screen here. Please let me know if you can't in the chat. So you can see that there are these different tabs here. For example, core for the core curriculum, CONR for our counseling and conflict resolution, and lead EdD for the EdD program. And you can see that we've gone ahead and we've added all the webinars tying into Leadership 701 under that class, under 711, and so forth. So you can actually go and look at the archive and see, oh, hey, I'm taking, say, Leadership 711 this semester, and they have a webinar about week 4. I'm going to put that on my to-do list to watch when week 4 comes around. So this is a new layer of information to make it easier for you to plan and know just what resources are available to help you with specific assignments. All right, with that said, let us dive into our main focus today. So we are going to understand how to search ProQuest dissertations and theses. That's a database of just exactly what you heard. We'll delve into the Leadership 701 assignment instructions, and then we will finish with talking about how to outline and draft this using an example dissertation critique that you will see getting outlined in front of your eyes. Now, I do encourage questions and feedback and input as we go along. There will be several opportunities to shape what exactly we look at for examples. So if you have a general area of interest where you are considering doing research on that for your dissertation and thinking that you might want to shape this assignment to move in that direction, awesome. Let us know when we get to those points, and I invite feedback. So we're going to start with talking about ProQuest dissertations and theses. And it's important to know that there are many different points at which you can access copies of theses and dissertations, and that this is something that has changed. When I started my graduate studies, it was right on that transition point where you were still required to print and bind a copy of your dissertation, that a copy would get sent off to University Microfilms in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And if other people wanted to order it, they would go and take the microfilm that was made of your dissertation, print a copy from the microfilm, and send it in the mail. So getting copies of dissertations used to be both very expensive, slow, and frankly, a pain in the butt. And the electronic catalogs would just have the abstracts that you could search. And in some cases, the electronic catalog would refer you to a printed catalog to read more than a couple sentences about the dissertation. Nowadays, we can search all this stuff online for the most part, you can download just about any dissertation or thesis free of charge. Sometimes you have to go through a system that requires you to log on, but it is very easy to find not only general research, but recent research on a topic. And the best database for this is ProQuest Theses and Dissertations. Depending on the exact subscription that your institution has, it might have a number of different names. In our case, it's called ProQuest Digital Dissertations and Theses Global, which means that ACU has a particular subscription package that gives you access to not just dissertations from American universities, but from universities around the world. All right, so we've got the step-by-step instructions here. And if you've RSVP'd to the webinar, you'll get a copy of the slide deck with these. If you didn't RSVP to the webinar, just send me your email address and I'll add you to the list to get a copy of this afterwards. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to ProQuest and we'll go through the basic steps. So I went from the ACU library website, and you should now be seeing my screen in Safari. I went through to the ACU library website, went to the databases pages, and select ProQuest Dissertations and Theses Global. And now you have a choice. Do you want to do the basic search where you will select all the same options in multiple stages, or do you want to go to advanced search and search all of them at once? It's totally a matter of preference. You can get the same result with both, but I'm going to show you each one in turn. And I'd like to solicit a topic that you are interested. If you could either type it in the chat window or send me a private message using the chat tool about something that you are interested in, and we'll look for topics there. And I have the first suggestion here, which is teacher retention. So we could just go ahead and start typing in here, teacher retention, and just do a search like that. Now, we will get a lot of results, more than 250,000,000 results. So something we immediately want to do is trim that down to a more manageable amount. And there are certain criteria that we'll want to be following that we'll review in a moment. And just looking at this right here, one of those things we want to do is to make sure we're looking at recent research, because this database, we've got the deluxe option here at ACU, it brought up results going all the way back to 1892. And while there may have been very interesting and relevant things from back then, I imagine that we want something a little bit more current than 130 years old. All right, so how do we do that? Well, we could just take the slider and drag it around and then hit update, or you could say enter a date range and type that in there. So I'm just going to adjust this and let's see what happens. So this gets us to just from 2010 to the present. So that's 12 years old. And you see we still have a massive amount, more than 100,000. So that is more than we want. So at this point, we'll want to be even more particular about the date range. For example, I'm going to say, let's look at stuff from 2017. And I can just leave that blank. All right, still got 45,000. That's a lot. So you can use other things to zero in on this. Let's add some geographic context and things like that. But let's go back to the search and look at our different options again. So you'll see that there are options such as full text and doctoral dissertations only. And for this assignment, you'll want to check those right away. Why full text? Well, if you can't read the dissertation, it's not going to help you because this assignment will require that you look at the dissertation and look at the text. Also, it happens to require that you be doing a critique of a doctoral dissertation, so you absolutely want to click that one. And so if we type in again, teacher retention, with nothing changed besides checking those boxes, let's see what we get for our results. So let's 10% less than we started originally. And if we started adding these other things, we'd find that it narrowed appreciably. All right, now let's talk about the advanced search. Now, the thing I like about the advanced search is you get to look at all these options and just make sure you're selecting them immediately up front. So here, let's take another thing that someone typed in, and they suggested barriers to dual credit. So let's type those in. Dual credit. Now, when you have a string of words you want to be searched for together, dual followed by credit, just put those in quotation marks. And barriers, I'm just putting this on another field. You could put them in the same line, but we might do some things later with it, so I'm going to keep them separate for now. Limit to full text, yep. Publication date, aha, here's the last 5 years. Now, something you might keep in mind when you are doing research for this and other assignments is that if it's something you want to use for your dissertation, in general, you're going to want most of your sources to be from the last 5 years of when you defend the dissertation. It's going to take you at least a year to get done with the coursework. So rather than just selecting the last 5 years, faculty will often recommend that you set after this year and make that 3 or 4 years from now. And you saw how many results we got earlier. There's plenty of research out there for the previous topic. Let's see what happens with this one if we search for just research published since, let's say, after 2018. All right, so we've got dual credit and barriers, full text, after 2018, and we're going to select doctoral dissertation only, and we're going to select English as well. Now, I happen to be bilingual in French, so I could search for French if I really wanted to, but there's a particular requirement for this assignment that makes me think that's probably not going to be a helpful thing. All right, so I'm going to hit search, and let's see what we get for this here. Now, 488 results. So that's immediately a much more manageable number of results than the, frankly, very large number that we had earlier. And if you're wondering why this is ending at January 2021, well, most dissertations are filed and uploaded to ProQuest at the end of academic terms. And that's not an instant process. I remember when I submitted my dissertation and it went to ProQuest, it took about 6 months for it to actually get entered online. So it's not an instantaneous process, although people may have defended in, say, March, and their dissertation is not necessarily available in ProQuest just yet. So don't worry about that part. All right, so we have 488, and we see immediately that there's some things we could select in terms of options here. We could try and restrict this by geography. We could try and restrict this in terms of the focus. Is this looking at it at the college level? Is it looking at it at the high school level? Are we looking for problems with it? And so if you are the person who made the suggestion, I invite you to give some additional detail here about what interests you. I'm going to go ahead and say, let's make this specific to Texas. Now, you'll see here that it's consolidated what I had on 2 different lines here. So I can actually just type in and saying, okay, search for this as well, and put in Texas here. And so this will remove any results that don't have the word Texas in there, which will be one way to narrow it down so that most of these will involve Texas. There are other ways that Texas might come up, but this will definitely cut it down. And you see it's keeping all those other additional limits that I had earlier. All right, so this is 338, so that's still pretty good. And I see that the student who made that suggestion for this topic has given me an additional term. And I'm going to search for underrepresentation. Now, there's a chance here that when I type this in, that we'll end up with a much, much smaller thing if I've used either a term that's too specific or a term that's not commonly used for this. And if you run into this problem, I encourage you to contact our library staff because they will help you find search synonyms, other words that might be used to search for the same thing. Now, we've got 52 sources. We only need one for this assignment, so this is not looking terribly bad. We've got a fair amount of stuff to pick through, and we could even go ahead and say, hey, maybe I want to only look at EdD dissertations. So I'll add that as well and see what we get. And 32, still, if we were doing the literature search for a dissertation, I might be concerned. But for this assignment, we just need one dissertation to critique, so that's fine. All right. Now, I'm going to change something here for the next stage because I want to show you a full process of how you can look for some of the information you need in this assignment quickly. And because I cannot and should not do your work for you, I'm going to change these date restrictions to something that you won't want to use, which is to say I'm going to look for something that is older than you're allowed to do for this assignment. So I am going to go ahead and I'm just going to look at stuff from 2012 to 2014. So this would be research that is a bit older. And that's, you can see that's ended up being too narrow, and that's probably because I mistyped something. So let me jump back here and see what went wrong. I think I know what happened here. So you've got two different sets of selectors, and I selected two things that disagree here. So you've got a number of options to do that, and it's coming from this being encoded here. So if you run into this problem, you want to select Modify Search. And so Modify Search will show you all these options here, and I can see, oh, well, there's where the conflict was. I'm going to take this one out, or I can just use this to specify the range that I want here. So in this case, my date range, I'm going to say, all right, I want this to be, let's say 2011 to 2013. Search. And again, if you have any trouble with this, just contact our library staff and they can help you out with it. You can even during business hours until about almost 9 o'clock in the evening most days, you can just get them on chat immediately or call them by phone. All right, so let us look at this example dissertation here. So we're going to first just look at the record here and see, does this meet the general criteria that I'm looking for, acknowledging that I've deliberately selected something that's older than you could use for this assignment. So this author was at the University of Northern Colorado, so American University. This was for an EdD degree of Doctor of Education. And before we look at anything else, we want to look at the abstract and see, does this seem to be describing what we're looking for? And we see underserved, this particular focus on Latino. It's a qualitative study using records. Qualitative comparative case study, and looking specifically at advanced placement coursework, which is dual credit because you can get credit for it in high school and then reciprocal credit in college. All right. And they even tell us, oh, they were using semi-structured questionnaires in these focus groups. And, this looks like it is checking off most of the boxes I want. Great. So I have a couple things I want to do here. One of those is to hit download to grab a copy of this. And I'm also going to go ahead and select Cite here. And you can see that this gives some options for drop-downs. And here we want to have, it's actually quite sophisticated, so it can change the capitalization. It's not perfect, but may save you some time here. And this does look pretty close to what we want. And you'll note it's got the permalink here. We'll come back to that later. So, all right, I've got a PDF copy of this that I can use. I have got the reference here. Great. Let's turn the page on ProQuest and look at the particulars for this assignment. So the dissertation critique assignment, the purpose, says in the instructions, is to look at a standard dissertation and examine the parts. Find a dissertation related to your research interest and provide a summary and critique of that dissertation. And just as an aside, if you've done the discussion already for this week, you'll know that you are supposed to be writing about the same thing in both. You're not supposed to be recreating the wheel and doing this for two separate things, although I've seen some people do that. That is more work than you need to do, and you may actually lose credit for doing that because it's supposed to be the same dissertation. So pick your dissertation and stick to it for the discussion and for the critique, because they're designed to build on each other. All right, now there's some specific things that you need to do here. You need to utilize either a quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods approach. Now, this isn't such a problem, and in fact, I have not searched for those terms earlier, because if it's coming out of a doctoral institution in the United States, it should be using one of those things, because those are the three major approaches or methodologies. Quantitative, where we're dealing with things that can be counted. Qualitative is a thing that can't be counted, or mixed methods, a mix of the two. And then that 5-year, or more or less, as recent research. There's a requirement that it be for a program similar to ours, meaning an EdD program, so that's why I added EdD to the search string. Avoid doctoral projects. So, for example, you wouldn't want to look at a doctor of nursing practice doctoral project. It's just different from what they want you to be doing. They want you to be looking at something that is similar to what you'll have to write. And then there's a note at the bottom, case studies and action research designs can be either qualitative or mixed methods. And that last note is because sometimes I see students assuming that because they've been working only with qualitative case studies or working with mixed methods case studies, that they're always that way, when in fact they can be either. So just make sure that you checked that the dissertation you're critiquing, that you know what kind of research it is. At the top of the page, provide a full APA-style citation of the dissertation, including a permalink. All right, so remember when we're looking in the library catalog here, this is what we want. We have the APA-style citation, and this is the permalink here. Now, we don't normally include permalinks in our references because a permalink or this style of permalink requires that you have an ACU login. And however, the instructions for this assignment specifically say to include a permalink, so this is exactly what you need. Just be aware that in your normal dissertation references, you wouldn't include this, but you will for this assignment. All right. All right, in your summary critique, you should answer the following questions. Use a shortened form of the questions below as APA headings to organize the paper. So this assignment happens to give you very detailed instructions about what to include. A list of 12 major items or sections and a number of questions or sub-items within them to answer. Starting with, okay, tell us the purpose and general rationale. In broad terms, what was the problem that provoked the study, and what was the specific purpose of the study? How did the author make a case for its general importance? And what methodological approach did the author use? Now, if you were writing, say, an annotated bibliography, you might be tempted to answer these out of order and start out with saying, oh, this qualitative case study did X. And you could do that here, but I'm going to recommend that you just answer these questions in the order that they're given here, because that will make the grading very simple and direct for your instructor to say, yes, they answered this question, check. Yes, they answered this question, check. What methodological approach? Oh, they say they used a qualitative methodology, check. All right, next up, fit and specific rationale. How does the topic of the study fit into the existing research literature, and how is that relationship used to make a specific case for an investigation? Now, if you're wondering why are you looking at the context here, well, this is in part because you yourself will be required to write about the context for your own dissertation and explain how that will fit into the literature that's out there and why it's important that your study be done to expand the literature. Then there's a directive to look in the literature review section and answer how does the information in that specific section survey the literature? What do they tell you about what's known? And that's kind of open-ended. You could talk about the organization, you could talk about the framework that they use, you could talk about, is there qualitative evidence for whatever it is that they're describing, or is there quantitative evidence, or both? And is this something where they point out, oh, so-and said you should do this next, and so they're doing that next thing? All right, next one here. How did the author indicate that the literature insufficiently addressed the specific problem in the study, the deficiency? Effectively showing this insufficiency justifies the need for another study. So that last sentence there is giving you a suggestion about what you should be doing when you write your own, but also explaining what you're looking for in a different way. You sometimes see this described as a gap in the literature or a practice gap. All right, problem statement. Include a quotation from the dissertation that you believe captures the problem explored. And there is a note here. Focus on the problem explored, not the purpose statement. I can tell you that it is a very common problem for people to put in the purpose statement, saying, oh, here's what we're planning on doing in this dissertation, as opposed to the problem statement, which is, this is the general and specific problem that the dissertation is designed to address. All right, participants, okay. Participants usually is used to refer to the research participants, the subjects, the people who come in and you collect data from them. But in this case, the questions do include asking about the author, the relevant or important characteristics, and how that relates to it. And then talking about in what relation, if any, to the study site and the participants who are recruited. And as an example, I've had a number of students over the years who have done research in districts that they worked in, sometimes with people who reported to them. And because that is something that could color the results, especially if it's, say, you're asking people to critique management and you are the manager they report to, well, that's the kind of thing that you need to disclose because it has a strong potential to bias the research. And not saying you can't do that, but it needs to be taken into account, and you want to take steps to minimize the impact of that. All right, and then also describe who was studied using specifics like number and characteristics and how they were selected. A context of where did the study take place and describe any important characteristics there. What the process they were using. What they were counting as their data, how were they collecting it and who was collecting it. How it was analyzed. The results they got. What conclusions they made. Then this is the author's conclusions, not yours. And then any cautions or limitations that they discuss, and any that you might add yourself. And then the last, what interesting facts or ideas did you learn from reading this? And this is open-ended, but you want to give as many specifics as possible. And the instructions finish with a note saying that you are reviewing the other author's work, the author of the dissertation. And for the most part, you'll be doing a very factual, objective reporting. And then in these last two sections, the cautions and discussion, that is where you might be bringing in your own opinion rather than your objective assessment. There is a rather dense looking assignment rubric chart here. If we simplify this by only looking at what you need to do for full credit, it's much more manageable. That's the slide here. And there is one note that I want to point out to you that is not stated as explicitly in the instructions, which is that this should be published by a reputable university in the United States. Now, what does reputable mean? Well, credited for one, and also that they have a reputation of respect. So there are out there universities that are uh, impolitely called degree mills because they will take students' money and their quality of research is not high. And if you are looking at a dissertation and you say, this is filled with typos and never heard of this place, it doesn't seem to be open anymore, you may decide that something you've been looking at is not a reputable university, in which case there will be plenty of other ones that you can use for this critique. All right, so it underscores in that second bullet all areas for the 12 questions are fully addressed according to assignment specifications. So that's saying, all right, those weren't suggestions earlier, those were requirements for what should be in there. And then general proofreading and well written text. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. Let's talk about how to go in practice from the instructions and the dissertation that we've selected to outlining this. Now, this is something where I invite you to follow along either by opening up a um, either by opening up on your own computer a copy of the template or just following along as we go. So here I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start a copy of our just regular APA course paper template. And then I'm going to start pasting things in here. Now for this, you shouldn't have a separate reference section. Why? Because you're just going to be referring to that one source. You could add other sources and then have to add a reference section, but that is really going above and beyond. That is more than you are required to be doing. And I think at this point in the semester, you want to make sure you do everything you need to for full credit and not give yourself extra work unnecessarily. All right, so I'm going to start out and I'm just going to copy and paste some of the instructions from the website into the paper template. And then I'll share my screen in Microsoft Word. Now, as you are doing this, you may discover that you have a number of uh, things that you spot that you want to clean up, that you want to fill in for yourself. Title of the paper, your name, your program, etc. And now is a great time to do that. Why? Well, in part because I have noticed that often students who are working up to the last minute will forget to put those in. And it's always a shame to lose credit because you didn't put your name or the instructor's name or something like that on the paper. So go ahead and fill that stuff in now. And almost ready. All right, so let's head over to the body here. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste in these instructions. And we're going to walk through these in order. So I'm just going to go ahead and select match destination formatting. So my copy and paste uses the same font and everything. And because it looks like I had some cross out here earlier, I'm just going to undo that. And now we see, oh, at the top of the page, provide a full APA-style citation of the dissertation. Include the permalink. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to the web browser I was in earlier. And I'm just going to copy this. Paste that in, and again, select Match Destination Formatting. Now, this isn't quite formatted how we want it to be. We also need for it to have what's called a hanging indent. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the Styles pane here. I'm in the home part of the ribbon, Styles pane here. And having clicked into this line, I'm going to select APA reference. And you'll see it gets this hanging indent so that each line after the first is bumped in half an inch. Great. So we've got that. And since we've added this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cross that off because it's done. And see this one. Okay. Answer each of the questions. I think I'm good on that. Going to cross it out. And as you go, I recommend that you cross things out to make sure that you are taking out any distracting details and just leaving yourself with the full list of what to do. Now, because it says use a shortened form of the questions as headings, you could just use this text here, or you could take this and say, okay, problem that provoked the study, specific purpose of the study. I leave that up to you. But I'm going to start out with doing this, or in fact, you could do what you see me doing here. I just hit enter, and now I'm going to put in this case, the first heading level, AP level 1. And you'll see it strips out the number, and I'll just take out this dash in the space at the end. And so I can go ahead and do that for each of these other things to add in these headings, and then not worry about having to add headings later. I can always tweak them, I can always rename them, but by making sure that I give them separate headings now, I make sure that I am taking care of that, and I will not be losing points for having missed it. So once you've done that, just select a different heading and hit AP level 1, and you can just click into that line and press Command Y if you're on a Mac, or Control Y if you're on a PC, and that will repeat the last thing that we did, in this case, applying the AP level 1 style. And so with this, we're able to very quickly add all those heading styles without having to do lots of jumping back and forth. There we go. So you see I have added the headings, and I can break this up into separate questions now without it changing things. And while I'm doing this, I can see, well, okay, this is an explanation of that question, so I'll keep it together. But where it's asking you to add different levels of stuff, we want to separate that into different numbers here to make sure we get everything. And sometimes you'll have what constituted data, how was it collected, and what was the role of the investigator. That is really 3 separate questions rolled onto one. And so by subdividing it, we make sure that we get all those points. Okay, so we've got our study here, and I mentioned that I grabbed a PDF of this already. Just take a quick look and see if there's anything that catches your eye here, because anytime you're copying the citation or reference from another source, it's only as good as how it was entered there or the algorithm that formatted it. Is there anything that you see on this page on this reference that looks like it might need some correction. And if you're seeing Latino, you'd be correct, because that is a proper adjective here. And the algorithm that was formatting this didn't know that. But we can see that Word says, hi, I think that's not right, and underlines it in red. And we look at that and say, oh, yes, just change that to big L, no problem. So always remember to check that. And let's see. Okay, well, let's go ahead and let's take a look at that dissertation. So I've downloaded a PDF to my computer. And so let's go ahead and let's take a look at that. You should now see the PDF being shared. And it is very possible, in fact, likely that many of the questions we have, that we'll be able to get at least the brief version of the answers just by looking at the abstract. So we're going to look here and see, okay, this was a qualitative study, okay, a qualitative comparative case study. So when I see that detail, I say, okay, I remember there was a question about the methodology and the research design. Let me go ahead and fill that information now. So see, okay, methodology, oh, yes. And just use the phrasing of the question. The author used a qualitative comparative case study design. Now, this is a little bit more information than you need. You could just say they used a qualitative approach. But, saying qualitative comparative case study design and gives us more detail there in a way that works compatibly, because qualitative is so broad, it's not super helpful. But saying qualitative comparative case design gives us an idea of, oh, okay, that's what they were using it for. Okay, so what else might we quickly answer here? Well, a quotation for the dissertation that you believe captures the problem explored. Now, you don't want to take this from the abstract, because the abstract is going to be very concise, but we might take a look at it and see. This is about mostly about how they did the study and what they found, and this is about why they did the study. So I would guess that the problem statement is going to be something related to the dilemma that educational leaders have providing a quality education for underserved students in the United States, and how this is particularly an issue for Latino students. Well, let's go take a look at the table of contents. And you could scroll down, or you could just do a search for table of contents and look and see how they labeled this. And we'll see, oh, in fact, they have a section, as you will when you write your own dissertation, they have a section that's called, in this case, statement of the problem. You'll also see it just worded as problem statement. It's the same, it's just a slightly more formal, slightly archaic way of wording it. That's fine, that's on page 21. Well, we're going to go right to page 21 and look for what we want here. All right. Now, you want to make sure that you're clearly describing a present problem. So while in the larger description of the problem, there may be important background information, make sure that you're to the point. So here, talking about some of the historical background, while certainly the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, this is the one that ended the Mexican-American War and vastly expanded the Latino population in the United States. While that is relevant, it's kind of too much detail, out of scope for this dissertation critique. If you included this, it would be what we'd call a distracting detail. And while you might say, well, the problem begins there, in practical terms, it's too far removed here. Now, looking at this, we have some stuff that doesn't sound good. All right, low percentage participating in AP programs. More stuff that is not good. Talking about a research gap. And this is kind of bridging into the study. So not every dissertation's problem statement will directly say this is the general problem, this is a specific problem. Sometimes you have to read between the lines to find out what is implicitly being described as the problem. Now, this is really talking about the state of the literature and historical trends, and this is talking about a need for the study. Those are things that will come in important later, but we're really looking at what is the problem that this study is designed to address. And I think that it's here. School districts across the United States are having trouble working with this demographic, specifically looking at as it's measured with AP courses, creating an opportunity gap, and they need structures that provide this. Okay. Now, you'd want to do a little bit more looking at how this aligns with the purpose of the study to make sure that matches up. So let's look at this right. The purpose of the study is to determine a deeper understanding of the issues that contribute to the underrepresentation of Latino students in advanced placement programs. Great. By checking that, we make sure that we're not zeroing in on the wrong content, that we're not zeroing in on historical context. Now, if it had said the purpose of the study is to examine the historical roots of the underrepresentation, that would be a very different study. And if that had been the case, we probably would be looking at things like the Mexican-American War here. But here, there's not a lot of access, especially when we compare it to their white counterparts, and that specifically school districts are having it. We can see, all right, so this first paragraph is describing the general problem, and the specific problem, the aspect of the general problem that is being addressed by this dissertation, and is in this one here. So if I were quoting this here, I would focus on these two sentences here. Now, what would this look like? Well, there are a couple different ways you can manage your quotations in APA style. Now, we want to keep this instruction and make sure we're following it, so let's go ahead. All right. School districts across America face challenges in finding effective ways to implement and sustain systemic changes within schools to support Latino students interested in participating in advanced placement courses. This limited access to AP courses creates an opportunity gap for the Latino population. All right, so want to wrap that in quotation marks. I would go ahead and check because of length to make sure it's not 40 or more words, because if it's that long, we need a block quote. So I'm just going up to tool, word count, and I see, oh, this is 44. So I could format it as a block quote, but that's also enough to look at this and say, well, okay, are there bits that if I trim it out will give a more focused description of the problem that will more clearly articulate what's going on? And say, well, okay, this part here, if I elide this, so elision or eliding is when you take part of the text and you take it out and replace it with these three dots, the ellipses. And in this case, I'm going to put in an ing form of the verb to bridge the gap so it reads more naturally for the purpose I've placed it here. we see, okay, challenges in finding effective ways to implement and sustain systemic changes within schools to support Latino students interested in participating in advanced placement courses, creating an opportunity gap for the Latino population. Now, it also happens that this has brought the quote below 40 words, which means we don't need to format it as a block quote. And as a rule of thumb, the reason you'd use the block quote formatting for a quote 40 or more words is because at that point, it usually doesn't really flow with the rest of the paragraph because it's so much of another text. So it's a good threshold to look at and say, can you elide this to more succinctly show and capture the problem? All right, now we can go another step and include the page citation here. And because it's just a critique of this one dissertation, we don't need the author date stuff. All we need is the page number, which in this case happens to be 22. All right. Some of these sections you might look through and say, okay, well, I can do this whenever. This isn't terribly mentally taxing. I can do that, you know, right before I go to bed or when I've got a few minutes left on my lunch break. Who was the author? Well, let's go ahead and look back at that PDF again. Now, if we go back to the table of contents, we can quickly look and see, is there a section where they describe themselves? Personal philosophical framework, that looks like a good candidate for talking about themselves. And researcher reflections and personal views, well, let's start with that first section and see. Now, I have not looked at this dissertation before. You are seeing me analyze it in real time. Here we are. So they identify they have over 25 years of experience in the American education system, 13 of which were in schools with a large percentage of high poverty Latino students. And that because they say down here that they were working with AP classes, we know that at least some of that was at the high school level. So you can go ahead and go to that portion and start filling in. The author is a veteran educator with more than 25 experience, and then you can check back from time to time to make sure you're catching all the details and saying, all right, and then go ahead and add in the additional stuff here. And you might find it helpful to break this into two separate questions here to make sure you get them, because this is really two separate questions. And so that there are more things that you can put in here. You want to read the whole section there to see if there are any additional things, like they do happen to talk about their prior research and stuff, but you get the general idea. Purpose of the study? Oh, well, there's a whole section on that. And we can even just do a word search for purpose to save us a little time. We see, oh, okay, that's going to be on page 22. Great. All right, and they say right out, the purpose of the study is to determine a deeper understanding of the issues that contribute to the underrepresentation of Latino students in advanced placement programs. Now, you could just paraphrase that, but I would encourage you to go one step further and say, or ask the question, okay, but why? Because the purpose of an EDD is usually not just to provide knowledge. It's usually to provide knowledge that will enable something or facilitate something happening. So if we continue reading through this section, we see, the hope is that the study will provide insights into this and presumably to do something. And if we look at the significance of the study, they'll tell you more about, what this information might allow being done, which is presumably to improve or increase Latino students' participation in these programs. Now, there's a question that came up in the chat about using the Writing Center's word template. This is not a ACU dissertation. This happens to have come from the University of Northern Colorado, so they're using whatever that university's formatting system is. And you'll often see EDD dissertations that use different formatting systems, which may not necessarily involve APA style. It happens to do that, and some students will look for universities with similar formatting just because it makes their life easier, but you're not required to do that for this assignment. It needs to be recent research, needs to be an EDD dissertation, and something that's relevant to your research. All right, we're almost at time here, so this is a great point for people to ask any questions that they have on their mind. Or if you didn't RSVP for this webinar and you want to get a copy of the video link and a copy of the slide deck, to go ahead and type that in. I often get questions about this, where did the study take place, describe important characteristics thing. And it's usually about asking that question of, well, what is important? Now, in this case, the student who wrote this dissertation was going to the University of Northern Colorado. I would bet, just because Latinos have been the fastest growing demographic in Colorado for at least 20 years, that they were probably writing about their setting, but let's see if they tell us where they were working. And we see, here, that was fortunate. They're talking about Latino students in Colorado here. So it appears that they are writing about the specific population that they've been teaching within. So there's that direct correspondence there. So if we're looking at that question again, it's saying, okay, well, what are the key characteristics here? That there is that familiarity. They have a strong and chosen familiarity, rather than, for example, going and studying things in a completely other region, which some people do so that there are no research conflicts. But in this case, the author is investigating an issue that they have a lot of hands-on experience. And if we were to take a look at the table of contents, if you're looking for more details on that, we'll see that there are sections here that suggest that they have some insights of their own. For example, their reflections about the meaning of the data and their personal views as compared to the literature. And this is one of those things. Just because someone else found a result in whatever conditions they do doesn't mean that you will find the same thing there. I've spent a lot of time living and working in Southern California. It's very different when you're in the majority in an area and people think nothing of, say, bilingualism in your everyday life. And then if you go to another context where it is the other, or less common, or perhaps less accepted for whatever reasons. So you may find that the author has given you specific things that you can talk about there, that they have put it in a section by themselves because they thought it was important. And so you can go and look directly at that. Let's just wrap up by going to page 132 to see that section. And I think we might. Oh, hey. There's actually a typo in their table of contents. The page numbers are a little bit off here, which, don't worry about it. We don't want to have that in our own work, but, you'll sometimes see that stuff in things that published. And you know what? They're done. They defended. They were given the title of doctorate. That's the most important thing. Typos do slip through here and there. So, looking at this, we see they were talking about a pilot study that they did that suggested that was a key component. And they say, it did not do that thing, however. It did not have a complete analysis. And so they talk about how their understanding of this data reflects a critical approach, saying, there was previous research that they did that could have been improved. And if it had been improved, then they might have more compatible results between the pilot study and the full study that they did. So look for things like that. The table of contents is definitely your friend. It saves you a lot of time in jumping around. And while it's certainly a good thing as you go forward in your research to read the literature in depth, including things like this, for the purposes of this assignment for doing the critique, you don't actually have to read this cover to cover. Use the abstract to get a starting orientation. Use the table of contents to look for the sections where the author has told you they are talking about the things that you need to be reading and writing about. And that will help save you time and let you make sure that you are doing all the things that you need to do. That's what we have for today. Thank you for joining me. I see a couple of you sent me your email addresses for getting copies of the slide deck and the video link. So I will make sure that you are added to that list, and have a good rest of the evening. Good night, everyone.